6.4, the home buying process. This unit will review the steps involved in the home buying process, as well as a discussion about the role of real estate and other professionals. Let's start with a review of the real estate professional. Real estate professionals can assume several roles. They can be engaged as a buyer's agent, a seller's agent, or even a dual agent. Let's discuss these in more detail. When we think of a seller's agent, this frequently is the listing agent, and this is the person that legally represents the seller. And the seller's agent is going to be paid by the seller from the proceeds. The buyer's agent legally represents the buyer. Usually they get paid by splitting the sales commission with the listing agent, or occasionally they could be paid directly by the buyer. The dual agent legally represents both parties. So the dual agent legally represents the interest of the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. They may be paid by the seller, the buyer, or both, and generally they're going to be paid from the proceeds of the sale. So it is important to remember whom the real estate agent is representing to ensure whose interests are being served. It's encouraged that our home buyers work with a buyer's agent so that they are ensured that the agent is legally representing them and advancing their interests as a buyer. So you should let your clients know that HUD encourages the use of a buyer's agent as their representative for the transaction. Making an offer. This is an exciting and frequently nerve-wracking part for the client. If a client finds a home and they're interested in it, they have to submit an offer. Remember that this offer is a legally binding contract, and usually the only opportunity to back out without any consequences would be if the inspection is not satisfactory. Backing out for any other reason will very likely cause them to lose their earnest money deposit. So the inspection period is usually the only out that they would have to get out of that contract that they've signed and not to lose their earnest money. It's important to note that the loan application process does not technically begin at pre-approval. It actually begins when an executed purchase contract is submitted to the lender. If a client is coming into you at this state, it's important to review the items listed here. The counselor should review the final price of the home, the property taxes that can be expected on that home, the homeowner's insurance, and that would include perhaps requirements to carry flood insurance even, mortgage insurance, if that's going to be applicable to their loan contract, and any homeowner association dues that may be required by that property. After a purchase contract and full verifications are received by the lender, a completed loan application is submitted for processing. The processor verifies all of the information, organizes the file, and sends loan disclosures to the client, including the truth in lending statement and the good faith estimate. The next step will be approval by the underwriter. Once this is done, the loan will be sent to the closing department so that final documents can be prepared and submitted to the title company. At this stage, the process clients should follow would be, and that the borrower should be prepared to ensure that all conditions listed in the approval letter have been met. They should be prepared to supply any documents requested by the lender. Sometimes that might be updated pay stubs or a letter, if they're getting a gift from someone, a letter that it is a gift and not a loan. So various documents may be requested by the lender. They should still continue to save money because there are still going to be costs that are associated with closing on the loan. Definitely they should avoid incurring any new debt, and I know that this is something that counselors always go over, but clients don't always follow through on. So we need to caution them to not incur any new debt before closing. At this point, they can also go ahead and order or transfer utility accounts for the new property. Now, this is a step that is often skipped. Clients get really excited, and loan officers and real estate agents are eager to seal the deal. But it is recommended that your client take the time to meet with you to review all the documents that are going to be signed at the closing table. This would include the promissory note, the actual deed of trust or mortgage, as well as the full HUD-1 settlement statement. So I mentioned in the previous slide that you may be asked to review the deed of trust or the mortgage with the client. These documents are often confused. They both serve the same basic purpose, to secure repayment of the loan by placing a lien on the property. But in other words, both these documents are used to make sure that the borrower is going to pay back the loan, but there are some significant differences. So let's talk about the primary differences between a mortgage and a deed of trust. Primarily, there are two differences. First is the number of parties involved is different. The mortgage only has two parties, the borrower and the lender. The deed of trust has an additional party called the trustee, and in the deed of trust, the trustee is responsible for the starting and processing the foreclosure request from the lender. So the second difference is how the foreclosure process is handled through the court system depends on whether or not the borrower is dealing with a mortgage or a deed of trust. Your book does have a more detailed explanation of the differences on page 183, and you are also able to see a breakdown on the states. Many of you are probably familiar with the term loan-to-value, or LTV. This is a ratio that is used to compare the amount of loan compared to the value of the property. In order to find out the LTV, you divide the loan amount by the purchase price, or perhaps the appraised value, if that's the lesser amount. And I think what's confusing for some counselors is that you're dividing a smaller number by a bigger number, and this is what gives you the ratio. But that does seem to throw some counselors. Just remember, that's always going to be the case, and this is why you get a percentage. So if the home value is $200,000 and the loan amount is $160,000, you would take $160,000, divide it by $200,000, and the result would be the LTV, or 80% in that example. Let's look at another example. Remember, when we're talking about the loan-to-value ratio, what we're calculating is going to be the loan amount divided by the purchase price. So if you're going to have a 60% loan-to-value, in this example, we're taking a loan amount of $120,000 and dividing that by a purchase price of $200,000, and that's what's giving us that 60% LTV, or loan-to-value calculation. The ratio is important because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have established underwriting guidelines that require an LTV equal to or less than 80%. Now, if the LTV is above 80%, it'll require mortgage insurance, so it still could be done, but it's going to require mortgage insurance. And this could be private mortgage insurance, PMI, or it could be the FHA mortgage insurance that we discussed previously, or even the VA. The FHA mortgage insurance will insure purchase loans up to 96.5% LTV. So that's why FHA loans typically require the smallest down payment, other than VA loans, which could even have 100% LTV. When discussing LTV, you'll run into many cases where a client has a second mortgage or a home equity loan or a line of credit. So in this case, the ratio is referred to as a combined loan-to-value. So you just have to add the two liens together in order to figure out the ratio. This concludes our discussion of Unit 5.4 on the home buying process.